Hello all, this is Freddie Williams. I'm going to do a quick rundown of the cover that I just illustrated for Blue Beetle issue 16. As you can see on my screen, I've got a bunch of files. This first one is a composite of the 6 cover designs that I came up with for the cover. We don't always do 6 different layouts, but it's good to do a variety to give your editor and the writer something to look at, some options to make sure that you're vibing on the right theme. Here, ironically, the very first one that I came up with is the one that they chose, so I wasted the rest of the day working up the rest of these layouts. But this is the layout that they went with, and it has a pretty strong couple of geometrical designs built into it. There's a triangular shape that's with Blue Beetle and the solar eclipse type thing that's behind his head. Even the Mayan pyramid type thing that's in the background, that's a strong triangular shape. Also with this guy who's one of the villains, his name is the Skywatcher, his hands and his face create a circle, so it's also framing Blue Beetle. There's a foreground, middle ground, and background elements so that, hopefully it has some depth. So from this stage, I went to create a breakdown drawing, and the trait dress here is just kind of mocked in. You can see it's a little sloppy. This is a breakdown drawing, which is like it's kind of in between the rough and the wireframes. This is a structure drawing to I'm intentionally being messy. It's kind of scribble sketching. Overall, it is a little clean because some of the sketch layers that I did I already deleted, and this is kind of saved out at a state where things didn't look completely erratic. But when I find whenever doing structure drawings, there's nothing wrong with being really messy and then kind of cleaning stuff up afterwards. So since this is digital, everything's on its own layer, and if I need to alter the hand or alter the size of the head or something, all that's very easy to do. And so this is the point to get all the structure correct, all your anatomy and proportions right, in a down and dirty sort of way, because I'm not too concerned. I've already got the composition worked out, which is the hardest part. Now it's just about execution and getting the shapes and the proportions correct. And then the next step is wireframes. This is where I'm more concerned about getting everything really clean and structured in the correct way, in quotes the correct way, the way that feels the best for me and my stylization. From there, because I worked on this page in what I call the hybrid method, which is to say that I set up the composition and layout and all the way through to the wireframe, the clean structure drawing, all digitally, and then before I went to inks, I printed out the structure onto my Bristol board, printing some of it in blue and some of it in black, depending on what it was. And then this is a scan of that traditionally inked cover. Then lastly, here's the colors. I scanned in after I scanned in the inks, then I just colored it in Photoshop like I would any other piece of art. Okay, but the part of the reason that I wanted to do this was to give a rundown of course, the kind of the whole workflow, from rough all the way through to the finished color piece, but it was also to show and talk about some textures. I've recently had some Twitter conversations and Facebook conversations about different textures and inks, and that there's different techniques. When working digital, sometimes it's easy to make things too clean and not dirty them up, or make them not make them organic enough. And I'm guilty of this as well. Sometimes you just you're trying to make a clean drawing and you forget to kind of the humanity of it, I guess. So working in the hybrid method encourages this, and this is a good example. I think there's several different techniques and textures throughout this piece. So up top we have sort of like motion lines or lines of awe, there's basically Blue Beetle and this solar eclipse type thing that's happening behind him are creating like a flare of light. And so even though I originally back here on the rough I pitched it as that it would just be black with stars. BWS is, I think, what I wrote in. I'm positive I wrote that somewhere. Let me look real quick. Okay, here it is. It's kind of hidden a little bit, but BWS means black with stars. So I was confident at the time that I was drawing the rough and the breakdown, the wireframe drawing, that I was just going to black all that out in the background. But then when I got to the kind of the inking stage, the preparatory stage, which I didn't really cover here. Basically, I've got the clean structure drawing on the artboard, and then I'll go through with like a non-photo blue pencil and start indicating like notes to myself and sketching little render tests in non-photo blue throughout the page. They kind of get eliminated here, so you can't really see them. Maybe you can see an indication slightly in the shoulder, but basically they're notes to myself that as I'm rendering, it's easy to kind of lose sight of what you're doing because you're noodling so much when you're doing render stuff, when you're inking. At that stage, which is the first stage I do for any page, I realized that there might be a depth problem with having an all black with stars background, and having the foreground figures and the Mayan temple type thing all having heavy shadows. There might be some problems, and I might have to resort to doing a bunch of thin halos, which can tend to flatten out a composition. So here I decided to make it a flash of light coming off of it, radiating off of the piece. And I have to say that was a very, very time-costly decision to make. And I like the effect, but when I got to the color stage of things, I ended up knocking out a lot of the line work. So it works in the original, and it works as in the original piece of artwork, the original inks. But I ended up knocking it back. So anyway, I'm kind of jumping around, so let me get more clear with what it is that I'm communicating, which is, so up top you have a kind of a lens flare or a fade created by line work, which is one technique that I'm using. Essentially, I'm using for the outer most lines, I'm using basically a brush marker to give me some thicks that will fade to thin, and then on the interior lines, I'm just using some technical pens and stuff like microns and some of the rollerball pens that I use. So I'm going from thick to thin with that. And then solar eclipse type thing, I'm using a different texture, of course, which is I masked off everything except for the moon or the solar eclipse part, the spattered part. Masked it all off with like sticky notes, I think, and then I just used a toothbrush with ink and sprayed on there to give a different texture. So if I was to try to meticulously craft each one of these dots by hand, it would take hours and hours, of course, but the spontaneity and energy that a toothbrush creates is going to be much better for this, as long as I efficiently masked everything off, so I'm having to clean up a bunch of stuff. So we have those two different textures. Then the next texture is the Mayan temple type thing in the background. The reason I say that is because I don't know if it's actually a Mayan temple. It looks like one. Anyway, I masked off everything except for the temple and used, I think, a paper towel. I dipped that in ink and then just blotted it all over, and it gave me this really organic, gnarly sort of texture. And these are textures I've experimented with in the past. It's good sometimes to experiment directly on your board, but you don't want to go too crazy without doing some tests on scratch paper at least. But I've done this technique or this sort of look on a lot of different pieces of art and commissions and stuff over the years, so I was pretty confident what I would get from it. And then on Blue Beetle, there's some really thin brushwork on him. The bigger black areas, I think I filled in just with like a brush marker, but some of the thinner line work, I was using a combination of one of the latex brushes. I can never remember the brand of it, but I've talked about it in a different video. So, but one of the thin latex brushes to give me some of these chunky, how would I describe these? Chunky, spontaneous sort of lines. Like some of the lines in here, you know, in the little rivets or whatever, the pleats of his costume. Pleat is probably not the right word, but it's the only word that's coming to mind. So basically I gave him a really shiny metallic look, you know, because he's metal. And hopefully, you know, that stands out versus all these other rough textures. Lastly is the guy in the foreground named Skywatcher, and almost entirely I was using a very quick inking style. I shouldn't even... To ink him was not quick. That's not what I'm saying. Each line I inked quickly. I did not meticulously craft most of these lines. I just used, again, that latex brush, but I used kind of the side of it and just did like a, you know, like a dab and a dot sort of technique to create, you know, this rough sort of organic look. Like he basically has like the skin of a mummy, you know, like a decayed flesh look. And it's kind of time consuming, you know, because there's so much of him on the page, but it's overall, you know, I'm not looking to finesse each line, because the rougher it looks, within reason, the more craggly his skin texture will look. Okay, so in summary or in conclusion, it's good to have a variety of textures and inking techniques throughout a page, even if you're not working on a cover, even if it's not Blue Beetle. It's just a good idea to vary, you know, the surface textures. None of the surface textures on here, at least I don't think, can really be confused for any other surface texture on the page. There's rough textures right next to each other. I'm pointing as if you can see what I'm pointing on the screen. I'll use the mouse instead. There's a rough texture in the Mayan temple, and there's also, you know, a rough texture on the Skywatcher's skin, but they still look, you know, pretty uniquely, you know, separate in texture. If I use the exact same inking technique on the Mayan temple and on the Skywatcher, you know, it would flatten out the depth of the piece, and it would make it less easy to understand to the reader. Of course, Blue Beetle, I mean, he ends up being, of everything on this page that has a lot of organic, sort of craggly sort of textures, he stands out the most because he's so shiny, so clean. And then in the coloring, I reinforced this. I used some textures in the Skywatcher skin. The texture in his skin, I gave kind of like I think I actually used some photos of some tree branches. Basically, with different blending modes in Photoshop, gives you some of this texture without you having to work for it. It kind of gives it to you for free, in quotes. So, you know, he's craggly. I did a little bit of color hold on the Mayan temple, which is to say that not all the lines are black. Some of them are you know, kind of a dark brown look to make them recede in space, to be a little bit further back. And then the sky I knocked out in a, you know, pretty dramatically. I color held everything to make it, you know, kind of red. You know, lastly, there's Blue Beetle with, you know, hopefully looking very, very shiny, because I want him to stand out and be, you know, everything else kind of has a red flare or a red hue, and then he's all blue, except for a secondary lighting of yellow, so a little bit of a chrome look. So that's it. I just wanted to give a quick rundown of this cover, sort of a work in progress, from the very initial roughs all the way through to, you know, structure, inking, textures, and lastly color, and sort of the thinking behind those different steps. Thanks.